yeah, because of music and the friends I was making, got exposed to drugs and alcohol. And I'd say I had a good like 5 years of doing that where it wasn't. I'm not one of those people that say like I was an alcoholic the first time I drank or an addict the first time I used, because I think I still had like a lot of really positive momentum in my life based on those friendships, really, and experiences I was having playing music. And so it was like alcohol first, marijuana, did a bunch of LSD, had really good experiences with all that stuff, experimenting and everything. And even got to like, for whatever reason, I grew up like had a lot of freedom as a kid. Like my parents weren't neglectful, but like definitely not a ton of direction. And so I always had to figure things out on my own. But also got a lot of freedom, and they let me go with two friends to England when I was 16, like without any adults, and stayed in a youth hostel and went to bars and everything. So that was another kind of like cementing experience that like, you know, having alcohol and bars and meeting people from all over the world that really was positive. I'd say I went to college in northern New Jersey, right outside of New York City at the Montclair State. And the fourth day I was at school, I got arrested for pot. And I had to go to, yeah, you still got arrested for it back then. And I had to go to probation in Newark. And I was pretty scared straight that first year of college because of that. And I was on probation, so, you know, getting drug tested and everything. So my first year of college too was kind of like straight edge-ish, maybe drank every now and then, but then had a really good positive year, went to the city a lot, got, you know, the art scene and the music scene or whatever. But that summer, something changed. So I was dating someone, and we broke up, and it wasn't the first time that happened to me. And I think I was like a week into the breakup and processing it like any normal person would. But pretty down at that moment. And then it was the summer and I was back home, and some old friends called me and they invited me to a party. They were like, "Oh, we're listening to some of your music. You gotta come over." And I get there and everyone's super happy and they're all sweaty and stuff. And they were doing ecstasy. And they said, "You want to try it?" I'd never tried it yet. So I was like, "Yeah, of course." And I did. And that night I remember, you know, it was one of the best, if not the best, drug-induced nights of my life. It was really euphoric, and I remember like there being a moment where I was on it and I was thinking about the breakup, and in that state I was like, wow, I'm really happy for her, like I hope she finds it. And I genuinely felt that way. And then of course, like after a couple of hours it wore off and I felt like worse than I ever did in my life. But something stayed in my brain that was like, you can use this stuff to escape how you feel. And I was pretty much, that's like, I say that night is when I became an addict and an alcoholic. And I say alcoholic mostly because alcohol is my main drug of choice. So for the next year or so, like I did ecstasy as much as I could, but as anyone with experience with a drug knows, eventually kind of doesn't work. And it's, you know, it's just like the more you do. Anyway, so instead I started drinking every night. And I was still going to college. I started playing in a band that had some success, and, you know, I was young, so I could kind of manage all this. And but at the end, the night would always end in drinking, like it had to. And I think from that age till the time I went to my first rehab, I drank every single night, maybe 3 or 4 nights off. And I remember those nights, and it's only because I couldn't get alcohol. And these are what I still consider like the good days. Like, but I was terribly lonely, you know. I was hungover every morning, just kind of like already sounded like the negative side of all that drinking and everything was a daily part of my life. And I thought it was normal just to be hungover every morning and going to work like that and stuff. I finished school, still playing in the band. I moved to Philadelphia. That was definitely where the beginning of the end started for me. I know there's some Philly people in here. My first apartment was like, you could open my door and throw a rock and hit the cop shop on 13th and Lombard, where you could buy beer till 2 a.m. And at that age, as you know, all your friends work in bars and restaurants and stuff. So it was just like, you could just go everywhere and get everything for free. And yeah, that's when cocaine also came into my life, because I was working in restaurants and playing music. So I'd go out to, you know, after hours and do cocaine, and of course drinking all night. And started dating someone around that time. You know, we moved in together after 2 months. It was extremely like intense, and got very like Sid and Nancy after a while. She was a recovering meth addict from California. wasn't doing meth anymore, but we drink together and other drugs. And yeah, it just got really, really out of hands. And also, like, it was the first time I really had someone, I say when you're in a relationship, it's like holding a mirror up to yourself and someone that could witness that side of me and start to point out why you drink too much. This is really a problem. And I didn't want to hear it. By the time I was 25, I was drinking in the morning. And over that year, it progressed to like drinking in the morning to drinking every hour. I became physically addicted to alcohol. Spent an entire year like that. Had to have a drink every hour and a half, or I'd start shaking. I didn't know what was going to happen. This is before like you could just Google things, so I had no idea what I was really getting myself into. So right after my 26th birthday, I checked into a detox the first time, and because I tried to stop and I got the like full-blown alcoholic DTs. I was hallucinating. I was hearing voices. It was maybe the worst day of my life. And so I checked into a detox, and I was 144 pounds. I'm 6'4". That's like 60 pounds less than I weigh now. Like I was like in bad shape, and it really like my health improved, and people didn't recognize me when I got out of there. That's when I was introduced to AA. You know, it seemed like weird and archaic to me at the time, but I'd started going to meetings, but you know, I didn't really get into it. And that started a couple of years of me just being in and out of detox and rehabs. Moved back in with my parents for a year. Got suicidal, so they started putting me on meds. It went from detoxes to like the psych ward. I was in the same psych ward 3 times in a year. I trigger warning. I mean, so isn't the last time I'm going to mention this. I had a suicide attempt, which obviously I survived. Things were really dark, you know, and then eventually ended up, after another really bad bender, ended up going to rehab in Scranton, Pennsylvania. That was my first taste of sobriety. So after that, like just after kind of like accepting that I need to go to AA, I moved into a sober house in Scranton. Managed to stay sober for almost 2 years. I was only going to meetings, but all my friends were going to meetings. I didn't do the steps or do any of the real work in AA, but I did a lot of meetings. And my life at the time was just contingent. My sobriety was contingent upon how well my life is going, and it was going well. And I was happy, and I got my first apartment by myself and stuff like that. And but like circumstances in life kind of took me out again when things got bad again. Just before 2 years I picked up, and of course it was bad. And it took another year, another 2 more trips to the same rehab, another psych ward in Philly, and this one had like mice in it and stuff. It was pretty fucked up. I was in such bad shape, ended up in the same rehab for the 3rd time. And then when I was in there, a guy came in to speak that was, he was just talking different to me. And he was more like me in the sense he was my age, and the way he talked about things. And he said something at the end of it. He's like, imagine everything is perfect. It's just my perspective is just a little off. And I feel like I just move it a little bit, everything would be perfect. And I had no idea what the fuck that meant, but it just sounded hopeful to me. And so I got his number and I called him when I was still in rehab, and then I got out and I said, would you sponsor me? And he's like, yeah, but what I do is I'll take you through the steps of AA. And I did the steps, and I did them in about 6 months, and my life changed. And I didn't touch alcohol for another 13 years. So I didn't touch anything but Kratom for another 11. And that's like when I really started to grow up and become an adult. And it's like I really think that life, I describe it as like pulled me back and just shot me into the future like a slingshot. And I after a year and a half, and I was like just a different person after doing the steps, and I just embraced life, and I could feel it around me. And I also did like yoga every day for 5 days, 5 days a week for like a year. And that was a big, another big part of it got related to meditation, eating well, stuff like that. And after a year and a half, I met my now ex-wife online. This was before Tinder and stuff like that. It was still kind of taboo to date online, but I was kind of tired of like just randomly meeting someone and then getting attached to them and then finding out all the sort of like our values didn't line up and stuff like that. So I tried the internet dating route, and I met Melissa, who lived in Montreal. And we met for the first time in person in New York City. We spent a weekend together, and it was kind of off to the races from there. And we had to figure out a way we could, live in the same place. And I was like, hell yeah, I'll move to Montreal for sure. And this was in 2013. And we got married fast. It was an immigration thing for sure. It was 9 months after we met. But then my life just grew again. I moved to Montreal. Immigration, I couldn't work for a year and a half waiting for my work permit, but I got into AA up here. Life was still good. I was in a new place with a new language, and back then I couldn't speak French, and so it was a little tough for me. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do for work. When I had gotten sober, I got a job actually working with disabled adults. It was an entry-level job, but I really took to it and realized, I do better with that kind of work than trying to be a musician or working in restaurants, and thought I might do something similar when I moved up here. But then so one thing that people do here is there's a lot of remote areas in the north of Canada, Indigenous communities, and you can go up there for work, and it's enticing because it pays a lot. So my wife at the time got a job. She works in like a social worker. She's a sexologist actually, and she got a job as a social worker up there. So I found a job teaching music to kids in school, not as a teacher, but working for a nonprofit. And so I went up and lived in a village of 300 people. It's an Inuit village, and I was scared to death. I moved there in January. It's like the fucking Arctic. It's like minus 46 degrees, and it's the tundra. There's no trees, and it's a village of 300 people. And I was very scared, but like sobriety kind of gave me the fearlessness to just try these new kind of things. And I took really well to the work, and the kids took really well to me. Had a really positive experience. I worked up there for a total of 2 years. Really intense, it's like socially, all the problems the world has are like magnified in Indigenous communities, and the worst things I've ever heard about humanity are through the eyes of people up there. But there was a ton of beauty and a ton of just really like incredible, tangible, emotional moments. And I got really into it. And then after 2 years, my wife, had to come back down, and I came back down here, and then eventually got hired as a supervisor for that organization. And I did that for the next 7 years, and my life kind of grew professionally then. I became like a real adult in the sense that, I became a supervisor, eventually a director. But at the same time, something was internally starting to really decline. I think that, the relationship I was in, like there were so many good things about it, and so many reasons to stay, because I'd really moved to another country, and I'd gotten married this time. And so I was in a bit of denial that I was unhappy, and I had enough things else in my life to make me happy, like my job. And eventually, during the pandemic, we decided to buy a house out in the country. So like, I was like, okay, well, this is just what being a life is. You do these things, and then you stop feeling romantic feelings for your partner, and I became less interested in affection and all this stuff. And these weren't warning signs for me, but they would have been had I not started slipping away from AA. I justified not going to AA because of all these other great things in my life, and I kept moving, and I kept leaving my support group. And so, slowly resentments grew, slowly unhappiness, and tons of couples therapy and stuff like that that just wasn't working. And eventually, we were living out in the, an hour outside of Montreal, in an area where I couldn't even really go to AA, because at the time my French wasn't good enough to go to meetings. There's English-speaking meetings here in the city, but so I had a work burnout, and totally attributed it to just the amount of trauma I was receiving from all the people I was working with, and being the boss with no one above me at the time. Not really recognizing the other parts of it in my marriage and everything. But anyway, I had a burnout, and I remember looking to, I didn't want to go on meds again. And so I started looking online for like herbs that, for anxiety, and Kratom came up. And the warnings were right there. I'm not someone that claims to be naive about this. Like, it was like, if you're an addict, do not touch this stuff. And I was like, probably works really well then. And in Canada, you can't buy it in stores, so I ordered it online. First time I took it, I got high. And I was like, oh, this is a drug. And I hid it from my wife, and I kept, and I got really into it, like this whole, like, the small batch vendors. And I even ironically joined a community on Discord about it, and I would talk to these people every day, and I really liked the community part of it, but it was like this secret I was holding, and I was on sick leave during most of it, so like it really grew. So I was someone that too was always like, okay, I can't get out of hand with this stuff, so I was always trying to control the level, and would be like, okay, now I'm taking 15 grams a day, I gotta curb it back. But I just remember in the first month it being like euphoric, and it made me better at everything I was trying to do and feel better. But eventually it just was like, I'd take it and I'd be in my basement and I'd watch YouTube videos and eat junk food, and I'd get like, it's half hour maybe of euphoria, but it was hit or miss. And it was just this, and then the rest of the day I was anxious and looking forward to it and wondering what the next dose was going to feel like. And it was a pathetic existence. And it was about 10 months into that when I tried to quit. I ended up going to first trying to go with detox. I came back to Jersey. It was just a little quicker to honestly get on Medicaid and do it that way. But it was like a cold turkey detox. They didn't give me any meds. I got out of there. My anxiety was through the fucking roof. I got like that's the part I can't handle is the anxiety from withdrawal. The acutes weren't too bad. Alcohol withdrawal acutes are way worse, but the prolonged anxiety from Kratom withdrawal I couldn't handle. So I did go on Suboxone. I stayed on it for like 2 months. I came back up to Canada. I learned about Sublocade, so I got on that. Oh, I'm ignoring a huge part of the story. On day 9 of my sobriety of that, we decided to get divorced. And to be honest, it was like a huge relief for me. And I didn't realize it was going to be a relief until the words were spoken. And so that's my separation day. That was in the end of 2023. And so it was a year and a half ago. And then I, moved back into the city, moved in with a friend, and found this community and started to really embrace my sobriety. And I did the steps in AA again. I got a new sponsor. I was mostly involved in this community. Like, these were the majority of the meetings I was doing back then. They weren't daily, but I met like Decima, Rami, Hillary, Martin. Sorry, I'm leaving people out, but there was just like a bunch of us that were always coming, and I really liked it. And my life got really a lot better. By the time the summer rolled around, I was on top of the world. I felt better than I've had in years. I got hired at this, I left my job finally. I was going to Vermont on the weekends to help one of my best friends has muscular dystrophy. He lives in Burlington, so he needed like an in-care worker for like a couple months. So I'd just go for 3 days a week and hang out with them, and that was my job. So a lot of the meetings I joined, I'd be in Vermont, and then I'd be back in Montreal. And then I applied for a job and I got it. And it was like a pretty prestigious job working for the big university here as a director. That job was going to start at the end of the summer. I was on top of the world. So I started dating someone. This is a very important part of the story. I've heard a lot of people say your first relationship after a long one is going to make a pretty big impact on you. And I didn't expect it to. I wasn't trying to like date, but I met someone really beautiful and really interesting. And she was crazy about me. I was crazy about her. So got really attached and had a pretty fun summer for a while, but I was ignoring all the red flags. And this is a lot of where the stuff I was talking about in my early development of like my relationship with my mother and stuff, like where if someone is passive aggressive to me and I care about them, I blame it on myself, and then I become obsessed with pleasing that person. And so the dynamic of that short relationship, which was like 4 months long, by the last month of it had turned into that. And I started that new job, and then 2 weeks into that new job, she ended things with me, and I was shocked of how much it hurt. And I was very confused, and the same panic attacks that caused my work burnout came back, but they were even stronger, and I did not know what was going on. And so I reached out to all my healthy sources for about 2 weeks, I tried everything I could. And then the first thing I did again was pick up Kratom, and that was after having about 9 months off it. And I'm telling you, it did not work. Like, it was nothing. It was like throwing a fucking match into a lake. Like, it was, but it created that reflex in me again to use, to escape. And it wasn't long after that, and that would, you know, basically was like about 13 years since I stopped drinking, that I picked up alcohol again, and that was in August. And it worked like a charm, and I knew I was fucked. And I became extremely self-destructive very fast. People in this community were reaching out to me, but I was on the decline, and I was bouncing around between apartments and stuff, like, at that point, because I got kicked out of where I was living because my roommate was in recovery, and I was subletting places. And I had a lot of money in the bank, and I had credit cards, and that is a bad combination for someone who just relapsed. And so I'll just give you a quick contrast. I went from like this being hired, my job description was like director of leadership development at a university for grad students. And about 6 weeks later, I was hanging out with a murderer in his apartment with the mattress on the floor, watching him cook crack. Like, it went that fast. And I really had a death wish. Like, I instead of like, no, I'm gonna get myself out of this, my thought was, if I'm not dead after 3 months, then I'll just kill myself. And I know people can relate to this. Like, having that as an option is almost comforting when you're deep in your addiction, because it's like, yeah, that then I won't have to deal with this. I will never have to take responsibility for this. And so I lived like that for a couple months. And after I had another a second suicide attempt, which I survived, and this time barely. I took like 40 Xanax bars or something like that. And I woke up in the hospital. Apparently I texted people when I was blacked out, and my ex-wife actually saved my life by calling the police. Woke up in the hospital, got out, drank, kept doing that for a week. And then I, at some point, got a knock on the door, and it was my father, and he drove me down to New Jersey. Went to a detox. Went to that detox 3 times, and then the 3rd time I was like, I'm gonna stay for a month. And that was in December. So December 21st is my new sobriety date. And I was pretty fucking awful, bad state, hopeless, but like anxiety through the roof, afraid of these panic attacks and everything. But 2 weeks into that detox, I was like, I'm just gonna do this again. I'm gonna get better. I got put on an antidepressant, which is actually working pretty well for me, but I also got back into 12-step recovery. There was a lot of CA meetings coming in, and so I just like, I'm gonna give this a shot. It's still the same process as AA. It's just, you can talk about drugs more. There were really lively people, and I got out and I saw, 2 weeks into there was a gym in the rehab. I started going every day because it's the only thing that would relieve my anxiety for a couple hours a day, and I've been doing that since then. And it works really well. And then I got out, and I decided to come back to Montreal. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I did. I moved into a sober house February 1st. It was around that time I joined back in these groups. Pretty much everyone was still here, like, which was fucking awesome. And everyone was really wonderful and warm, welcoming me back. Oh, I should mention, during this relapse, I was in the States, and I tried 7-0. So those of you dealing with that, like, I mean, that is a straight up narcotic. That is, the first time I took it, I got fucking itchy. It was like doing heroin. It's like, holy shit, okay, I'm glad that you can't buy this in Canada. But anyway, like, so when I was in detox, I was coming off alcohol and that at the same time. It was pretty rough for a couple of weeks. But anyway, I fully threw myself back into 12-step recovery. And I said, yeah, I'll be, at these meetings a couple nights a week. After a certain amount of time, started sharing Tuesdays again, and saw the group grow quite a bit since then, adding all these groups and meetings during the day. And so for me, it's like, after, all these experiences, like, I can honestly say it's actually tomorrow will be 5 months. And I'm grateful. I'm a grateful person. I'm grateful for my entire story, because what it did was it led me to a way of living life. And I never in my life felt like I had I was always confused about how to like how to live life and how to do it right. And now I'm not confused anymore, you know, and I feel like my singleness of purpose before everything else is being sober and helping other people be sober. And it's not just like this, like, oh, okay, I guess this is what I got to do. It's like, fuck yeah, I get to do this, you know? And I'm pretty hardcore about my recovery now. Like I go to a meeting every day, mostly in person here in Montreal, but I'm now that we have daytime meetings, I join when I can. I go to the gym 5 days a week. I'm in trauma therapy. I really improve my diet. And I think one of the things above all is I learned to stop taking the people in my life for granted. I cherish my friendships and my family and people and all of you, like in a way that I didn't before, and realized that even though I had done the steps in AA and it changed me, like that's what I was ignoring was the community. And so by basing my life around this for the past couple of months, I have not been in a bad mood in months. I have not had a bad day in months. Like, yeah, bad things have happened, but it doesn't mean it was a bad day. Like, that's life. You know, life is perfect when bad things happen. My perspective just needs to be correct. And that's what's in my power to do every day when I wake up. As far as like, I don't know, just to wrap things up, like, really hopeful about the future, feeling really healthy and just great new wonderful people coming into my life on a pretty regular basis. I'm interviewing for a job on Tuesday to be a street intervention worker. So I'm going to go back to frontline work, and I'll be working with the like homeless indigenous community here. It'll be pretty intense, but I'm kind of eager to not be sitting at a computer anymore and responding to a need. And I kind of think like that's a cool way to live. I don't have kids. I don't have a ton of pressure financially. I sold my, house to my ex-wife, so I can kind of like choose what I want to do based on what I think is the right thing. So yeah, here I am today. Like it's life is good. Like I said, like I just hope that like when people come in, I try not to give advice because everyone is coming in with, I respect people. I respect you on day one. I respect you coming into this meeting, having done a horrible bunch of selfish shit to get here. You still have my respect because that's me, and I respect you to make your own decisions. But if our shared experiences come together and can create some kind of advice for you, I think that's what this is about. Like I wouldn't be the same person if I wasn't friends with Raimi. I wouldn't be the same person if Decima didn't put so much in her time, and Hillary and everybody so much in their time in creating this community, and I can't not be grateful for that every day. So I think that's been a half hour, and thanks again, Kelly, for giving me this opportunity. It was fun for me, so that's it.
Thank you so much, Matt. Truly, thank you. I told you guys he was the comeback king.